So we know about employer-sponsored visas, the 482s, the 186s, the MLTSSL, the STSOL, but there's also another stream called the labour agreement stream, and a particular area in that is called the DAMA. DAMA. What is it? You've probably heard of it. Tune in to find out what it's all about. Welcome back, guys. We have a very special guest here on the show today. We have Anna Filing here, a very, very experienced immigration lawyer. Now, let's talk a little bit about employer-sponsored visas, in particular, labour agreements, which is the third stream that a lot of people don't know about, because people know about 482 visas and 186 visas. They know about the medium to long-term, the short-term stream, but there's also labour agreements. What are labour agreements, first of all? And then tell us specifically what DAMAs are.
Sure. So a labour agreement is sort of agreement between an employer or a business and the Australian government, under which they're allowed to sponsor employees. Yeah. And the benefit of this labour agreement is that employers or businesses can request special concessions, which will allow them to sponsor employees that they normally wouldn't be able to sponsor.
Wow.
Yeah.
So labour agreements, I believe, have 3 different streams that people can apply through. So initially you've got industry-specific streams, and then you've got one specific to the company that's applying, or the business that's applying, and then the third one is the DAMA. Now let's talk about the DAMA today, because that's a hot topic that a lot of people have heard about it, but they don't really understand what the DAMA is. First of all, DAMA, is it an acronym? What is DAMA?
Sure. Yeah, it's an acronym. Yes. It means Designated Area Migration Agreement.
Beautiful. So what does that mean?
So basically, there are certain regions around Australia, generally in fairly regional areas, where they have what's called a DAMA, and it's an agreement specific to that regional area.
Okay.
And then employers can sort of opt in for a labour agreement as part of that regional agreement.
So basically there are certain areas in Australia which would be classified as a DAMA?
Yeah.
Or in a DAMA area.
In a DAMA area, yeah.
How many regions are there in Australia that fall under the DAMA?
13.
There's 13?
Yeah, currently 13.
Currently 13. And they're looking to expand that, I believe, because it was very few to begin with, and then it keeps growing and growing and growing. And this is going to be in there for at least the next 12 months before the reform.
Yeah.
So something to capitalise on. Now, give me some examples of some of the areas, for example. Like, we're here in Melbourne, and if we're to look at a regional sponsored visa, basically anything 30 kilometres away is considered regional, but not so for a DAMA.
Yeah.
So give me an example
areas.
of certain areas in Australia that are common DAMA areas that you've experienced, that you've represented.
Yeah, sure. So I guess some exambles would be, there's the far north Queensland area, Cairns,
Oh, beautiful. The nice areas,
Yeah. There's southwest Western Australia. That would be sort of Margaret River and surrounding areas.
All the winery regions. Yeah, nice.
Yep. There's also Northern Territory. Given that the Northern Territory is quite remote, actually the whole state of the NT has a DAMA.
Well, so anywhere in the NT could be considered DAMA.
Yeah.
Does that apply to any of the other states in Australia? Because that's a territory.
That's also South Australia.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're telling me, let's just get this straight here. All of Northern Territory and all of South Australia is considered DAMA, so it is definitely something that people may consider when they're looking at sponsored visas, if they're residing in Northern Territory or South Australia, or if they're willing perhaps to relocate there.
Yeah, definitely.
Beautiful. Now, what is the advantage of a DAMA? Why would people do a DAMA-sponsored 482 or a 186 over a short term or the other kind of methods?
Yeah. Well, there's quite a few advantages, really. But mainly it's just so much more flexible in terms of what occupations you can nominate and be sponsored under.
So are you telling me it's not just restricted to the MLTSSL and the STSOL lists?
No. So the DAMAs actually have their own occupation lists that they use use, and they are able to include occupations that aren't on either of those lists.
Wow.
normally.
So each DAMA, each of the 13 areas will have their own occupation lists,
Yeah.
which I assume would be in-demand occupations or where they're having shortages to
Yeah,
fill.
specific to that region.
Give me some examples of some of these occupations.
Sure. For example, you could be a waiter.
A waiter?
Yeah, in a region that really has a shortage of hospitality workers, including front of house staff and waiters.
So you can be sponsored as a waiter. You don't
Yeah.
have to upskill yourself or
Yeah.
sell yourself as a restaurant manager. You can actually be a waiter,
Yeah.
be sponsored under this DAMA.
Yeah.
Does that lead to permanent residency?
Yeah, it can.
It can.
Yeah.
Wow. Wait. What else? What are some other?
There's some
positions?
more sort
In
of fun
hospitality.
occupations. Or in hospitality, you could be a barista,
A barista.
for example. Yeah.
Wow. So all you baristas out there,
Yeah.
which I know lots from Thailand, Korea, Japan, who are struggling to try and find an occupation here. If they're a good barista, they could potentially be sponsored in some of these DAMA areas. Now, you said more fun occupations.
Yeah.
Well, I think a barista's a fun occupation, but what is your definition
Yeah,
of
it's
a
more
fun
fun
occupation?
than that. For example, you could be a brewer.
A brewer?
Yeah, you could brew beer for a living and then
That's
obtain your
mad.
permanent residency through that.
Cool.
You could be a diving instructor.
A diving instructor?
Yeah, that's probably
Cool.
about as fun as it gets, really.
Yeah. Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Pretty nice way to get your PR, I'd say.
And I think what's important that there are concessions there. All right, so listen, that's really interesting about those occupations there because that gets me excited that you can be nominated and sponsored under an occupation not necessarily on the STSOL or MLTSSL because of these different occupation lists. Now, I believe there's also concessions that apply. So the good news doesn't end there. Concessions, what are they? How many are there?
Sure. So there's 4 main concessions.
Yes.
Those are age,
Age,
English score,
English,
TISMIT or salary,
salary,
and skills and experience.
skills and experience. Wow. So this sounds very generous. Let's start with the first one you said, age.
Age. Okay. So age.
Yes.
Yeah. So generally under the normal employer-sponsored program, you have options to apply for permanent residency
Yes.
up to age 45
Okay.
through the 186 visa or the 494 visa.
Yes.
But then after 45, your options really become very limited in terms of applying for PR.
Yeah.
through
So
the
like
employer-sponsored
I
pathway.
know that the 482 doesn't have an age cap and we get people applying for that and then they go to transition to a 186 and there's very difficult exemptions to get there. So
Yeah.
you're saying there's age exemptions with this. Tell me a little bit more about these age exemptions. So
Yeah.
how do the exemptions work? Because you don't have to have an high income threshold salary or
Yeah.
work for, as a university lecturer or whatnot. What are the exemptions? How does it work?
Sure. So I mentioned that each DAMA has its own occupation list.
Mm-hmm.
Those occupation lists will also specify which occupations are eligible for an age concession.
Okay.
And the majority of them are in
Yes.
most cases. So that means that with a lot of occupations, you could be eligible to apply for PR up to age 50 or even 55.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's really good because before all of these changes, the skill select and all that in 2012, the ENS used to have an age limit of 50. Then they reduced it down to 45 and people are still struggling with that because you've
Yeah.
got lots of skilled workers
limiting,
over that. So the DAMA, you said, has a lot of concessions that it can extend the age up to 50 or even 55.
In a lot of cases. Yeah.
Right, cool. And that's specific to each DAMA and occupation. So
Exactly.
it's not for everyone, just keep an eye on that. Second concession, English.
Sure, yeah. So the general English score required for example, a 186 visa or a 494 visa would be competent English, which, for example, would be 6 in each band in IELTS or 50 in each band in PTE.
Yes.
But then through the DAMAs, a lot of the occupations have a concession where they can apply even if they don't get that score. There's a lower score required.
So how low possibly could it be? Are you saying that people could potentially do a 186 through a DAMA with vocational English, so IELTS 5?
Yeah,
or
say
PTE
IELTS 5, yeah.
36? Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay, and we'll discuss a bit more of that afterwards. The third concession, which is salary, because we know all of the sponsored visas, you've got to be on that 70K unless you've got very difficult, exemptions that apply to you. How does it work with DAMA?
Yeah, same deal. So in each occupation list, it will specify whether that occupation is eligible for a salary concession. And that means that you could nominate an employee even if they're not making $70,000 per year. there's a 10% concession on that. So they could be making, say, 63,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is very, very good news.
Yeah,
very, very good news indeed.
Employers a lot more flexibility.
It does.
Especially in regional areas where the TISMIT might be a bit too high for those regional areas.
Yeah. And especially when you said some of these occupations which are lower skilled, not discrediting waiters and baristas at all, but it may be rather difficult for a waiter to earn 70,000 just working in a cafe or something like that. So they've got some concessions there.
Yeah.
And finally, you said something about skills?
Yeah, sure. So again, for the normal PR pathway through employer-sponsored visas, that would be the 186 or the 494. You would need 3 years of full-time work experience attained after your qualification or after reaching the fully skilled level. But through these concessions, you could apply for PR or even the 482, temporary sponsored visa first. Even if you don't have that experience, you could have less experience.
So you're basically saying, as we know, the 482 requires you to have a relevant qual or experience in lieu of that as per ANSCO and 2 years of experience, potentially full-time as per immigration policy. But you're saying that is not necessarily the case with DAMA.
Yeah, it's often a lot lower. For example, they might reduce it to 1 year full-time. So in a lot of cases, you could apply for a 482 even if you only have 1 year of experience.
And even further, if you have an Australian qualification, can you get away with even no experience if you have a relevant Australian qual?
For some occupations, yeah.
Wow. It sounds a little bit too good to be true. So why is this a relatively untapped visa?
I would say, firstly, not that many people know about it.
Yes.
Those that know about it don't quite know the details. They might hear that it requires the employer to enter into a labour agreement, and they're put off by that because it sounds complicated and demanding, but it's not the case generally.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, because before people get too excited thinking, great, I'm a barista, I'm just going to apply for a job and get my sponsored visa that way. There's always two sides of a coin when it comes to the sponsored visa. We've talked about all these concessions and whatnot with the employees, but first of all, the employer needs to enter into a labour agreement.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what a labour agreement is without going into too much detail, but it's just a form of a business getting accredited, and that's not the right word, but approved by the government
being
to then
approved to be a
sponsor
sponsor.
people.
Yeah. The main requirements, in particular for the DAMA stream, would be that they need to be located in that particular DAMA area.
Yes.
So their main place of business needs to be in the area under which they're applying. And then they also need to demonstrate in some way that they are also committed to hiring Australian citizens and permanent residents where possible.
So the requirements are relatively similar if they're doing sponsorships or nominations under the other 482 streams, but mainly if they're located in a regional area, they should be eligible. If they were going to be eligible to sponsor under the other streams, they should theoretically as well if they're located in a DAMA area.
Absolutely, yeah, because those regional areas were selected because they have labour shortages. There's a shortage of skilled workers in each of those regions. So that naturally makes it easier to demonstrate that they need to sponsor someone.
Yes.
Because we already know that those regions are affected by skilled worker shortages.
And are processing times relatively fast? Because we know very recently that immigration has prioritised processing of regional sponsored visas. I understand you had a 494 nomination allocated in how long after you lodged it?
Yeah, a few hours after.
A few hours after you lodged it, you got it allocated. Are they extending that to DAMAs as well?
Yeah, DAMAs do tend to be processed.
Are relatively quick.
Yeah, quicker than perhaps normal nominations. Yeah,
that's good.
Outside of DAMA, yeah.
All right, so I think you've summed up the DAMA really well. Any tips that you may have for migrants looking to be sponsored under the DAMA area? Because to get to permanent resident, can they just go straight there and do a 186 permanent DAMA, or it's a bit of a road that they have to go and do the temporary stream first and then stick around for a couple of years to get there? Is that correct?
Generally, yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the easier way. And also some of the DAMAs will specify that you do need to be on the temporary visa for a time before you apply for the 186.
And that will be pursuant in each labour agreement that an employer has.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that would need to be checked.
Yes.
But yeah, I guess in terms of tips, to look up all the different DAMAs there are, all the possible regions that you could relocate to.
Yes.
Look at the occupation lists, maybe even potentially be open to trying something new that you haven't necessarily done before.
Because of the concessions with skills and whatnot.
The concessions, and think about what the shortages are in those areas and what kind of occupations
and something
prioritizing.
I always advise my clients to do before they commit to taking up a job in a regional area that they've never been there before. go check it out first. If it's interstate, go fly there. If it's in Victoria, drive there, stay a couple of days, nights, because you're putting your future in the hands of a regional area.
Yeah.
You want to actually check it out first so you're not wasting your time and your employer's time. Would you agree with that?
Exactly, yeah. Keeping in mind that you'll most likely have to live there for, say, a minimum of 2 years, 2 to 3 years. Yeah, make sure that you're actually going to enjoy living there.
Good. Well, thank you very much. That is the DAMA. So thank you very much for your time, Anna.
Thanks, Anthony. Thank you.
See you guys next time.